Hi there, welcome back to the studio. Today we are making the airplane mode travel jewelry case. This is an elegant, practical, and compact organizer designed to keep your favorite pieces safe and tidy while you are on the go. As you can see here, the case features several elements like exposed zipper pocket, earring flap, ring cushion, necklace hooks, and a clean finish structure with quilted details for a soft polished look. This project is perfect for intermediate sewists or confident beginners looking to challenge themselves with zippers, quilting, and layered constructions. I'll walk you through every step to help you create a beautiful and functional piece. So let's go over the materials you'll need to bring this case to life. First, your main fabric. The best fabrics for this project are medium weight woven or non-fraying fabrics that provide enough structure. Quilting cotton is a beginner-friendly option. For a sturdier or more elevated finish, consider using canvas, denim, twill, or linen blends. You can also incorporate non-fraying materials like fox leather, vinyl, cork fabric, craft tex, or even genuine leather for a polished and modern look. These materials not only eliminate the need for edge finishing but also add texture and durability. Just keep in mind that working, for example, with leather requires some skills and the right tools, such as leather needles, clips instead of pins, and machine capable of handling thicker layers. Then you will need lining for the pocket bag. Choose a lining that complements your main fabric. You can choose from poplin, broadcloth, quilting cotton, lightweight linen, lightweight twill, or even velvet if you want a more luxury interior feel. Next, foam. This is optional but recommended for adding support on the case. For the best results, choose a high density sewable foam stabilizer designed for bag making or craft projects. The foam should be lightweight yet firm, providing the structure and support without adding excessive bulk. You will also need polyester batting. I recommend using quarter-inch thickness. Try to use a lightweight polyester batting that's easy to sew and adds soft volume without too much stiffness. Also, polyester stuffing, the kind commonly used for pillows or plush toys, it should be soft, lightweight, and easy to shape. I also decided to incorporate a craft foam layer into the earring flaps. This step is completely optional, but I decided to do it because my fabric does fray and I'm not using laser or a hot tool to pierce the earring holes, so the foam might give an extra support, help maintain the shape, and especially will make it easier to punch the earrings directly into the flap without worrying about fraying or distortion. That said, even if your main fabric frays, you can get creative with your design by making the earring flaps from a different material, something that doesn't fray and is easy to pierce, like fox leather or thick felt, for example. But later on in the tutorial, I will show you several options that you can use to make the earring holes cleanly and secure, no matter what kind of material you are using. Next, you will need medium to heavyweight interfacing. Apply the appropriate fusible interfacing depending on the weight of your fabric to ensure the case maintains its shape and structure. An exposed zipper that matches the color of your fabric and is 7 inches in length. A sewing thread with a color that matches or contrasts your fabric depending of the design detail you want to enhance. You will also need 6 snaps for this project. I'm personally using a set from a kit I bought on Amazon, which includes snaps in different colors along with the tools needed to install them. It's super convenient and extremely beginner friendly. So I will leave the link below in the description in case you want to check it out and use the same one or use this as a reference to buy something similar. And of course, you will need your regular sewing essentials, including a turning tool, a chopstick or a knitting needle, and an iron to use as you go. And finally, the pattern. This case comes in one size only, and you'll find the printable pattern available below in the description box. Now we're going to start prepping our fabric. To do so, we're going to steam our main fabric and lining with enough steam to pre-shrink it. Next, set the pattern on the wrong side of the fabric following the instructions listed on them and place the grain line parallel to the selvage of the fabric. Make sure the distance between the grain line and the edges of the fabric is the same at the top and bottom of the arrow. This will allow you to set the pattern straight. Use pins or weight to secure the pattern and avoid movement, and since the pattern has seam allowance already included, just cut the pieces following the outer edge of the paper. When cutting your pieces, keep in mind that the main travel case needs to be cut twice in your main fabric, one for the internal side and once for the external. You will also need to cut it once in foam and once in polyester batting. If you feel like your batting is a bit too thin, you can definitely double up the layer for extra cushioning. Personally, I like to cut the foam and batting together in one go so I can save time and keep the layers aligned. Then you just need to cut the remaining pieces in your main fabric, lining, and interfacing, as indicated in the pattern's instructions. Before diving into the construction process, it's important to consider that the length of the zipper opening is proportional to your actual zipper size. If you are using a zipper that is longer or shorter than the one suggested in the pattern, be sure to adjust the length of the opening rectangle accordingly. So we're going to start our sewing process by placing the pocket bag lining right sides together with the internal piece of the jewelry case. Align it 3/4 of an inch from the upper edge of the internal piece, then pin it in place. Next, on the wrong side, it means the side that is facing you, iron to the center of the pocket bag lining the piece of fusible interfacing to reinforce the zipper area. Position the interfacing half an inch to maximum 5/8 of an inch from the top area of the pocket bag lining, making sure it's well centered using the zipper rectangle guide from your pack. Transfer the rectangle marking onto the interfaced area of the pocket bag lining and make sure it is centered and straight. Then sew around the entire rectangle following the marked lines precisely. Using a ruler and a fabric marker, draw a straight line down the center of the rectangle. The rectangle is half an inch wide, so your center line should be positioned 1/4 of an inch from either long edge. Next, mark a point half an inch from each end of the rectangle along the center line. From each of those points, draw two diagonal lines connecting to the corners of the rectangle's short ends. Now carefully cut through the marked lines. Start by cutting along the center line, then follow the diagonal lines into the corners. When cutting into the corners, get as close as possible to the seam without cutting through it. Precision here is key for sharp corners and a clean zipper finish. Next, fold the entire pocket bag through the opening to the wrong side of the internal piece, gently pulling the edges so the rectangle sits flat and crisp. Take your time adjusting the corners and edges neatly, and once everything is aligned, press the opening well with an iron to keep it flat and in place. To secure the corners, sew the small triangular tabs down, stitching them in place on top of the pocket bag lining at each side. To continue, place the zipper underneath the opening, aligning it so that the zipper teeth are perfectly centered within the rectangle. Make sure the right side of the zipper is facing up through the opening. Pin the zipper in place, adjusting as needed to ensure it lies flat and even. For added control, especially when sewing around the small corners, I recommend to base the zipper in place. Once secure, edge stitch around the entire rectangle, sewing the zipper in place. Use your zipper presser foot and take your time, especially when approaching the size. Sew slowly or manually turn the machine wheel to avoid hitting any metal zipper stops or teeth. Then remove the basting stitches and fold the bottom half of the pocket lining upwards, aligning it with the top edge of the bag lining. The right sides of the lining should now be facing each other. So sew along the top and side edges of the pocket bag using 1/4 of an inch of seam allowance to close it off. Be careful to not catch the main internal piece of the jewelry case in this seam. Only the pocket bag layers should be sewn together. To finish the raw edges, you can search them for a clean look. I personally trimmed the edges with pinking shears for a lighter and flat finish. For the next step, start by applying the fusible interfacing to the wrong side of the earring flap. Press carefully and trim any excess of the interfacing that extends beyond the fabric. Then place your foam piece on the bottom, then layer the two fabric pieces on top with right sides facing each other. I strongly recommend testing this step on a scrap of fabric first, especially since the material you choose can affect your approach. For example, if you are working with thick felt or fox leather, you might only need one piece of fabric for the top of the flap. So testing first is crucial because it will help you decide what works best for you. Sew around the sides and bottom edges using quarter of an inch of seam allowance. Leave the top edge open for turning. Once sewn, trim down the excess foam close to the seam to reduce bulk. Then clip into the curved areas to help the flap turning smoothly, but be careful to not cut through the stitching. Understitch the seam allowance to the lining side as much as possible and then turn the flap right side out. Push out the corners gently using a chopstick or a knitting needle and press the entire flap flat and just finish it by top stitching along the sides and bottom edge. To create the holes for inserting your earrings, there are a variety of options depending on your fabric type and the tools you have available. In the handbook, you'll find a list of suggestions that go from laser cutting or hole punching tools to even using an awl, which is especially useful for non-fraying materials, but even you can also simply punch the earrings directly into the flap, especially if you have added a foam or craft support layer underneath. Make sure you choose the method that works best with your materials, sewing setup, and your earrings. After that, place the earring flap with the wrong side facing up on the internal piece of the jewelry case, aligning it with the placement line indicated on the pattern, or clip it in place to secure it, and then sew along the top edge using quarter of an inch of seam allowance. Trim the seam allowance to reduce bulk, and then fold the flap down into its final position. Press the edges neatly and top stitch at 3/8 of an inch from the fold, enclosing in this way the raw edge inside. Now take the ring cushion strap and fold it in half lengthwise with right size facing. Sew along the long edge and one short end using quarter of an inch of seam allowance. Trim the seam allowance down to 1/8 of an inch to reduce bulk, and then turn the strap right side out. I'm using a straw and a chopstick to make this turning much easier. Once turned, press the strap flat and begin filling it with the polyfill to create a soft cushion-like fill. Help guide and distribute the filling with your hands and a chopstick or turning tool as needed. Use one of your rings as a reference to know how much stuffing is needed. It should be firm enough to hold the jewelry security but still soft and flexible. Once filled, close the open edge of the strap. To do so, fold the left open raw edge quarter of an inch to the inside. If needed, hold it in place with a pin for better control. Sew along the folded short end to close the opening neatly. And repeat the same procedure on the other short end for consistency. Once that's done, place the finished ring cushion on the internal piece of the jewelry case, aligning it with the placement guide suggested on the pattern. Hold it temporarily in place with a few pins or clips. It will be fully secured later when the snaps are installed. Next, fuse the designated pocket piece and fold it in half, wrong sides together. Align all edges and top stitch along the upper straight edge using a quarter of an inch of seam allowance. This will help you to keep the fold crisp and secure. Then place the folded pocket on the bottom edge of the internal piece, matching the placement indicated on the pattern. To hold it in place, stay stitched along the sides and bottom edges using 1/8 of an inch of seam allowance. This step temporarily secures the pocket because it will be fully sewn in when the jewelry case is clean finished. As you continue, prepare the hook pieces by fusing both fabric layers. Then place them right sides together and sew around the edges using quarter of an inch of seam allowance, leaving a small opening to turn the piece right side out. After sewing, trim the seam allowance only in the stitched areas to reduce bulk. Carefully turn the hook right side out using a pointed tool to push out the corners for a clean shape. Press the piece flat, making sure to fold the raw edges of the opening inwards, and finally top stitch around the entire hook at 1/8 of an inch of seam allowance, which will also secure close the opening. Repeat the same procedure for the rest of the hooks. Place the finished hooks on the internal piece of the jewelry case, aligning them with the suggested placement lines on the pattern. Next, fold each hook over to find the center of the folding and mark it. This line will be used as a reference to attach the hook to the internal piece. Then top stitch only one end of each hook to the internal base, reinforcing the seam for durability. Use the previous 1/8 of an inch top stitching line as a reference for clean alignment. Repeat this process for all hooks, making sure they are evenly spaced. Secure them temporarily with a pin, since snaps will be added later to allow the loops to open and close. Take the foam piece and place it underneath the internal piece. Carefully align all the edges. Once everything is in place, baste around the edges to hold both layers together securely. For extra stability, I would also recommend you to run a few additional stitches across the body. This will prevent any shifting and make your piece attach securely to the foam. After that, take your external fabric piece and begin by transferring the quilting design you like to apply. For this project, I'll be using the square design, creating evenly spaced horizontal and vertical lines, but the pattern includes different grid designs reference to help guide you in case you want to follow a different design. Also, feel free to customize the layout based on your personal style. Use a ruler and a fabric pen or tailored chalk to carefully mark the lines onto the fabric. Make sure the markings are clear but removable. If you plan to quilt more often, consider using a quilting presser foot with a guide bar, which allows you to sew evenly spaced lines without needing to mark every one. Next, place your batting piece underneath your external fabric, making sure the right side of the fabric is facing up. Carefully align the edges of both pieces and secure them together with clips around the perimeter. To keep the layers from shifting during quilting, I also recommend adding a few temporary basting stitches around. Once the layers are secure, proceed to sew the quilting lines following the design you previously marked. It's recommended to use a straight stitch and start quilting from the center, working your way outwards to help avoid puckering. Sew slowly and carefully, keeping your stitch lines straight and your fabric flat as you go. Once done, trim any loose threads and remove the basting stitches. Next, place the quilted external piece and the internal piece together to compare them. Carefully align the edges and check that the corners and sides match up. Since the external piece has been quilted, it might have slightly shrunk or shifted in shape. Use this opportunity to trim any fabric excess from the internal piece to make both layers even. Now it's time to install the snaps on the internal piece. The exact process can vary slightly depending on the type of snaps and tools you are using. As I mentioned before, I'm using this kit from Amazon, which includes the metal snaps and some setting tools. Each functional snap requires two components per connection point, a stud and a socket, along with their corresponding caps, the flap decorative size. I strongly recommend testing your snaps and tools on a fabric scrap first. This will allow you to check the pressure, placement, and alignment, especially since different fabrics and snaps kits may behave differently. To install the snaps, Start by marking the placement points on the overlapping pieces as indicated on the patterns. Or just use your chalk and mark the bottom part of the decorative cap and then place it on top of the area where you want to put it. Use an awl or a punch tool, often included in the kit, to create small holes through the fabric layers where the snaps will go. Insert the decorative cap side through the hole from the front and place the socket over it on the back side. Use the snap settle tool to press them together securely. For my kit, I also needed to use a hammer, so I included that in this part, but it will depend again of the tool that you are using. Once you have installed one side of the snap, use a piece of chalk or washable marker to lightly mark the center of the snap. Then press it gently but firmly against the fabric where the opposite snap piece will go. This will transfer the position, helping you align both sides perfectly. Once marked, punch the holes again and proceed to install the other half of the snap, in this case the cap and the stud, and repeat exactly the same process for each of the hooks and the ring cushion, making sure all the snaps are properly aligned and functional. Now let's sew the rouleau strips by folding each one in half lengthwise with right sides together. Sew along the edges using 1/4 inch of seam allowance, leaving the ends open. While sewing, slightly stretch the strip. Once stitched, trim the ends at 90-degree angle and trim the seam allowance to 1/8 inch to reduce bulk. Then turn the strips right side out using a turning tool. To do this, clip near the end of the strip slightly without cutting the stitch. Then insert the tool and lock it in place. Next, gently pull the tool through the strips to turn it right side out. After turning, press the roller strips flat and ensuring the seams are centered. To continue, in the center of both the internal and the external piece, place one of the straps with right sides facing down against the fabric. Align it carefully and pin it in place to secure it before finishing the case. Finally, clean finish the jewelry case by placing the internal and external pieces together with right sides facing. Align the edges carefully and sew around the entire perimeter using 1/4 inch of seam allowance, leaving a small opening on the side about 2.5–3 inches just on one side for turning the case right side out later on. Once sewn, trim the seam allowance along the stitched edges only to reduce bulk, especially at the corners. Then turn the case right side out through the opening using a chopstick or point turner to gently push out the corners for a clean defined shape. Press the edges flat, making sure to neatly fold in the seam allowance at the opening. Finally, top stitch around the entire edge using 1/8 inch to maximum 1/4 inch of seam allowance to give the case a crisp finish and to secure close the opening. Now give your case a final press and that's it. Your travel jewelry case is complete. I hope you enjoy making it as much as I did. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And please don't forget to share your finished case. I would love to see what you create. Have a happy sewing and I will see you in the next one. Bye!